Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone joining us. First, I would like to personally welcome all attendees and speakers to this second webinar on modern technologies in disaster management. My name is Maxine Kroft, and I'm an intern at the UN Environment Programme under the Resilience to Disasters and Conflicts Global Support Branch. It's my pleasure to welcome you to the second part of our webinar series called Modern Technologies in Disaster Management. This series is divided into 4 parts, being robotics, artificial intelligence, drones, and Internet of Things. The first one, on September 14th, focused on robotics, and today we will discuss the use of artificial intelligence in disaster management. The webinar will give us the chance to learn from and engage with leading experts from around the world as they discuss opportunities and challenges associated with artificial intelligence and its use in disaster management. Some housekeeping rules before passing the floor to our first speaker for her opening remarks. I would like to remind all attendees to turn off their cameras throughout the webinar and please keep yourself muted, otherwise it will interrupt the presenters. Attendees can ask questions at any point using the chat function. We have 4 speakers with us today who will take us through their presentations, but first we will start with opening remarks from Dr. Monique Kuglich. Monique is the Innovation Manager at Fraunhofer HSI and Chair of the ITU WMO UNEP Focus Group on AI for Natural Disaster Management. She previously managed operations for the ITU WHO Focus Group on AI for Health. Monique has experience in fluvial and limnological fieldwork, geochemical laboratory methods, applied mathematics and statistics, greenhouse gas emissions, and climate risk and impacts research. Unfortunately, Monique couldn't be here today, but I would like to thank her for her recorded opening remarks. The floor is over to Monique.
My name is Monique Kuglich. I'm the Innovation Manager at Fraunhofer Heinrich Hertz Institute in Germany, and I'm the chair of the focus group on AI for natural disaster management, of which UN Environment is an official partner. Today, I'd like to provide some background about the motivation for the focus group, the objectives, and the operations. At the closing, I'll also be providing information about how you can participate. Natural disasters can be defined as damaging physical events of predominantly natural origins, for instance, atmospheric, hydrologic, geophysical, oceanographic, or biologic. Impacts of natural disasters include injury, mortality, damage to property, including cultural heritage, infrastructure, resources. In more concrete terms, between 2005 and 2015, 1.5 billion people were impacted by disasters, with 700,000 lives lost, 1.4 million injuries suffered, and 23 million people left homeless. From a financial perspective, global losses due to such events since 1980 amount to $5.2 billion US. Unfortunately, the impacts of natural disasters are exacerbated in certain regions, such as small island developing states and least developed countries, and for certain populations, such as women and children. They're also expected to worsen due to population growth, rapid urban development, and a growing frequency and intensity of some events. Consequently, they're addressed in the activities of many UN organizations and programs, including policy guiding publications, such as the Sendai Framework, and the SDGs, including SDG 1, SDG 11, and SDG 13. The focus group is interested in learning how AI can offset the impacts of such events. Through advances in AI-based algorithms, a growth in computational power, and the emergence of large and often publicly available data sets, we've seen an increase in the use of data and AI-driven approaches to solve tasks in many fields, including health and fintech. This raises some questions. Through tapping the potential of AI, can we improve our understanding of natural hazards, our ability to detect events in real time, our ability to forecast events, and our ability to communicate an impending or ongoing disaster? What are the best practices when using AI, and what are the limitations? And as seen in this figure, which was published in the February issue of EOS, a journal from the American Geophysical Union, priority areas include creating documentation with standards and repositories to facilitate sharing and discovery, generating new benchmarks, and developing architectures and frameworks catered to the needs of geospatial data. To contribute to these priority areas, the focus group is exploring best practices in data collection, monitoring, and handling to support the training and testing of AI-based algorithms, how AI-based algorithms can be used for detecting and forecasting events, and how AI-based algorithms can contribute to effective communication. Let's look at these categories in greater detail. High-quality data are the foundation of AI-based algorithms. So some questions to explore are, what requirements should data meet when being used to train or test an AI-based algorithm? For instance, what are the best practices when it comes to data collection and storage, data quality and pre-processing, spatiotemporal resolution and extent of data, or representativeness of data? And can AI-based algorithms be used to enhance data quantity? Through AI-based algorithms, can we detect changes in landscape features and remotely sensed imagery and create data sets reflecting those changes? And using methods like federated learning, can we avoid data export issues? Finally, can AI-based algorithms be used to enhance data quality? Can they help us locate inhomogeneities in a data set so that we can improve the overall quality? AI-based algorithms can be used to enhance and improve the traditional models used for numerical-based forecasts and physics or data-driven projections of natural disasters. They can also be used to detect features in real-time data streams and support early warning systems. So some questions that we're going to look at are, what is the current gold standard when we're detecting and forecasting events? How can AI-based algorithms bring those methods to the next level? How can AI-based algorithms be used to leverage synergies from different data sources more effectively? How can they help us identify complex relationships and patterns in data? And what should be considered when evaluating an AI-based algorithm? The Sendai framework advises us to develop, maintain, and strengthen people-centered, multi-hazard, multi-sectoral forecasting and early warning systems, disaster risk and emergency communications mechanisms, social technologies, and hazard monitoring telecommunication systems. So some questions that we're going to explore are, once an event has been detected or forecast, how can AI assist with the immediate response? For instance, through early warning systems, through decision support systems, through dashboards, push messages to cell phones, or automated translation services? And how do we ensure that communication methods are reliable and trusted by the population? Are they accompanied by a clear set of protocols to ensure that individuals know how to respond? These topics will be explored and used to produce a series of deliverables. We're going to be having workshops that bring together experts and stakeholders, highlight groundbreaking activities in this topic, and encourage participation in the focus group. We're going to be making a roadmap of AI activities in these areas of natural disaster management. We're building a glossary of common technical terms and definitions to ensure that experts in different fields are all speaking the same language. We're making 3 non-normative technical reports that summarize the findings of our analyses based on input from selected use cases, and we're producing educational materials to make the content of the technical reports accessible to all stakeholders and to support capacity building. So what is a focus group? Focus groups are a construct of the International Telecommunications Union. They're created to support the efforts of an associated ITU study group. For instance, the mandate of the parent study group for the focus group includes telecommunications for disaster relief, early warning, network resilience, and recovery. They provide a working environment for pre-standardization and standardization activities in a chosen area, and they can be rapidly established and have the freedom to choose working methods, leadership, financing, and desired outputs, such as the deliverables that were shown in the last slide. For the focus group on AI for natural disaster management, we converged the information and communication technology expertise of the ITU with the natural disaster expertise of the World Meteorological Organization and UN Environment to create a platform for international, multi-stakeholder, and interdisciplinary collaboration on this topic. The focus group has a multi-tiered structure. At the bottom, you'll see these colorful blocks with different names of topic groups in them. These topic groups are clusters of experts exploring how AI is being used for a specific application and a specific natural hazard. For instance, we have a topic group on AI for flood monitoring and detection. The first three working groups that you see, the working group on data, modeling, and communications, are dedicated to drafting the 3 technical reports. They digest the output of the topic groups, survey the body of literature, and connect with experts to look at how is AI being used in the field, what are the best practices, and what are the challenges when using AI. The fourth working group is dedicated to building the roadmap, and we also have an ad hoc group, which is looking at tools that can be used to support the use of AI for natural disaster management. So I'd like to talk about the management of the focus group team. In addition to myself, there is Dr. Shoplaki, who's a climate expert at the University of Gießen. We have Professor Jörg Luderbacher, who's the chief scientist at the World Meteorological Organization. We have Dr. Murali Thumarakudi, who is the operations manager at the crisis management branch for UN Environment. We have Mr. Srinivas Jaganti from the Department of Telecommunications in India. We have Dr. Rakia Babamaji, who's from the National Space Research and Development Agency and the Africa Science and Technology Steering Committee on DRR. And we have Ms. Yanshan Wang, who's from China Telecom. This brings us to my favorite slide, and that's how to get involved. So if you're interested in this topic and would like to learn more or to participate, I encourage you to visit our website. There you'll find our onboarding document with guidance on how to create a free ITU user account, how to join our mailing lists, how to register for workshops and meetings, how to use our remote participation platform, how to access our collaboration site, that's where we store our documents, and how to submit written contributions, for instance, use case proposals. Many thanks for your attention, and I wish you an insightful and enjoyable webinar.
As we move forward after these insightful opening remarks, we will hear the practical applications of artificial intelligence in different stages of disasters. Today, we invited 4 panelists. Each of them will provide a presentation, and at the end, we have allocated some time for discussions and a Q&A session. It's now my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Muhammad Imran. Muhammad is a senior scientist and lead of the crisis computing team at the Qatar Computing Research Institute. His interdisciplinary research focuses on natural language processing, crisis computing, computer vision, and applied machine learning. He received his PhD in computer science from the University of Trento in 2013, and he then worked as a research scientist at QCRI from 2015 to 2020, and he has published over 90 research papers in top-class international conferences and journals. Muhammad, the floor is yours.
All right, thank you very much for the opportunity to speak at this event. Good morning, good evening, good afternoon, everybody. My name is Muhammad Imran, and today I'm going to talk about how to use social media for crisis response, specifically about extracting information from social media sources using artificial intelligence techniques. Next, please. So before I jump on the work, I would like to give a big shout out to my colleagues and collaborators. As you can see on your screen, there are many. Without their help and collaboration, the work that I'm going to present was not possible. So thank you all for that. Next, please. All right, so let me start with telling you the importance of response time. As you might be aware that the response time is a very important factor to prepare for first responders the relief efforts after disasters. And some surveys say that even reducing the response time of 1 minute can save thousands of lives and extensive economic damage. On your screen, you can see a result of a large-scale survey done by FEMA in the US when they surveyed many emergency management professionals, and they asked about the value of different types of information after a disaster. So here you can see that on the x-axis, you have time, like 24 hours, after 48 hours, 72 hours, and so on and so forth. On the y-axis, you have the value of information according to the participants of the survey. And there are different information types here. You have building damage, transportation damage, critical infrastructure, and other types of information. And you can notice that as the time passes, the value of information goes down. For example, look at the building damage. After 24 hours, it reduces its value by 10%. And after 48 hours, it reduces even more than 30%. So what this signifies is the importance of information, situational information, actionable information for first responders to make timely decisions. Next, please. Now, that's the whole focus of one of our systems that we developed at QCRI called Artificial Intelligence for Disaster Response. So here we try to leverage data from different social media sources, and you can name, for example, the most famous one are Twitter and Facebook, and then provide critical information to humanitarian organizations during disasters in real time. So the process is to mine social media platforms, extract the information which is in line with the information needs of different humanitarian actors, and then provide them some early information when other information sources are not available. Next. Now, before I jump into a couple of real world use cases where we use this system, I'm going to show you a very high level architecture of this system. So we have several different components. This is a very high level abstract way to look at the system. We have a bunch of data collectors, and then we have an approach that combines the human intelligence and machine learning together. As you know that machine learning alone, especially supervised machine learning classifiers alone, do not work well when they applied in the wild. When they are applied in the real world situations, they do not work well. So you have to retrain them, you have to adopt them, and probably for unique, non-trivial challenges, problems, you have to train them from scratch. But for all these reasons, we have human in the loop, and that is using our micromapper platform that enables volunteers force, for example, standby task force or other volunteer organizations to jump in, help us train machine learning classifiers, and then serve the responders. Next. Now, we have been using this system and some specialized version of these systems during many different types of real world challenges. So here I'm going to show you one of them. So according to Global Coalition to Protect Education from Attacks, more than 11,000 attacks were reported, which harmed more than 22,000 students worldwide between 2015 and 2019. Now, the main problem around this area is that many incidents are not covered by the media, and many events are not reported in the media, but they are potentially reported on social media. And especially the type of events related to the harassment, sexual harassment, etc. So we thought to leverage social media to see what are different types of education insecurity events that people report, for example, killing, murder, assassination, injured or wounded people, or maybe sexual violence, etc., and then develop some machine learning AI-based systems to capture them and provide them instantly to the response organizations. Next. So we developed a specialized system based on our AIDR system, which actually looks at multilingual streams from Twitter, and we have developed multilingual classifiers which actually mine Arabic, French, and English streams in real time and look for all different types of education insecurity events. And all of that data goes into this map that you can see on your screen. And developing this classifier required some domain expertise. And for that reason, we had, and also having a kind of partnership with United Nations OCHA and Education Above All. And like Education Above All is mainly focused on this issue of mapping education insecurities and then do some policy making. So here on this map, you can see the blue circles represent the aggregation of tweets in some area about this particular problem. And then the orange triangles are the human collected incidents reported by another organization called ECLID. And you can see that there is some correlation and where the human, obviously the human has constraints to not process all different types of large amounts of data. So the machine here comes in very handy to explore social media sources. Next. This is another example of this system where we use computer vision techniques to process social media images that people share on Twitter, for example, and we look for damage reports. So this deployment was during Hurricane Dorian 2019, and the task was to get all the images that people are posting while the hurricane was making landfall in different states in the US, and provide those severe and mild damage images to a Montgomery Community Emergency Response Team. This is a volunteer organization who actually worked with FEMA and other response organizations to provide different volunteering efforts. So we helped them examine social media in real time. And in this effort, we collected around 8 million tweets and 300,000 images. And using our system, we only found 13,000 images showing severe and mild damage. And this is a huge reduction from 300,000 to 13,000, almost 98%. Now, think that if volunteers, human volunteers have to look at 300,000 images, how much time, how much effort they would be needing. So this is another example how AI is extremely helpful to process these images using state-of-the-art deep learning models to extract severe and mild cases. Obviously, we by doing this, we tackled many other challenges, including deduplication, relevancy, and geomapping. Next. This is another example of Hurricane Harvey, where we plotted these text-based urgent text-based informative tweets on the map during Hurricane Harvey. And you can see such a map given to the decision maker or first responders during a situation would be extremely helpful. And here in this particular example, you can see the markers of the map on the map show different types of information ranging from infrastructure damage to affected individual or reports of injured people. Next. Okay, this is another example where we partnered with EMSC, a European Mediterranean Seismological Center and British Geological Survey organizations to look for landslide reports on social media. And this is still in process, but our system has been deployed for more than 1 year and have been collecting landslide incidents which people report. And for example, here on the slide, you can see that we have collected so far more than 570,000 images, and the system was able to detect only 25,000 of them as landslide images, which is around the 5% of it. And this is another example and very, very useful use case for these organizations who actually rely on many other traditional ways which are time consuming and costly to determine landslide incident, which is like having early awareness of the landslide incidents can be helpful for many response tasks as well. Next, please. Okay, this is another example where we develop computer vision models to look at damaged heritage sites. You know that UNESCO has a major focus on the preservation of heritage sites around the world. And although they are not many, but having an eye on them during conflict, wars, and disaster situation is a very difficult task. So we developed, again, some computer vision deep learning models, in this case, DenseNet, to train with thousands of images to mine social media streams and look for reports where the image is showing first whether the image showing some buildings, and those buildings are of type heritage sites, and whether those buildings are the scenes are showing some damages. And having such a system in place is hugely helpful for UNESCO-like organizations to keep an eye on the reports that people post on social media around the world. Next. Lastly, I want to also show you one of our efforts that we did recently with MIT, where we published this huge data set of 1.1 million labeled images around 43 disaster incidents and with places. So here you can see that the matrix shows you we have covered flooding on bridge, flooding in farms, flooding in forests, gas station, urban area, rural area, and so on and so forth. So why we did this? Because deep learning models need, first of all, huge amounts of data. Second, they need to have diversity. So having a footprint of one incident in different places would greatly help deep learning models to make more robust inferences. And the link is here. I think these slides will be shared also. You can download and use this data. Next. That's it from my side. Thank you very much. And these are a bunch of links to our data website, our system website, as well as if you want to look at our publications, you can go to crisiscomputing.qsierra.org. Thank you again, and I look forward to your questions.
Many thanks for the interesting presentation. We will now have our second speaker, Mr. André Chung. André is the founder and CEO of RoboticsCats. RoboticsCats is a climate tech startup headquartered in Hong Kong that develops AI-powered tools for governments, businesses, and people to mitigate wildfire risks and damages by early detection. Before founding RoboticsCats, André spent most of his career in cloud computing, software as a service, and the telecommunication industry. Over to you, André.
Thanks. Good evening, good afternoon, good morning. Thank you for having me. I'm Andre, founder and CEO of RoboticsCats. I'm going to share with you 3 customer stories using AI to mitigate wildfire problems. This picture is impactful. You may have seen it on social media, which is about the mega bushfires in Australia 2 years ago. The fire was too big for the coroner and the firefighter to do anything, but stand still. We can do something. Next. With climate change, we have more and bigger wildfires in more places. They cause death, long-term health impacts, biodiversity destructions, huge economic losses. We have wildfire disasters in Greece, Australia, California, and other places in the last few years. The bigger problem is we are having them again recently. They are repeating themselves. We should do something different. Next, please. According to a UNEP study, wildfires cause negative impacts to 9 out of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Wildfire is a global problem that affects many aspects of our life. Next. The good news is we know the solutions. Research and studies from universities, governments, and think tanks around the world identify 6 areas that can significantly mitigate wildfire challenges. 1, first and foremost, better forest management. 2, fuel reduction. 3, hardening electric grid. 4, better urban planning. 5, build homes with more resilient material. And 6, early wildfire detections using cameras and AI. We need to do all this. There's no silver bullet. Early wildfire detections is part of the equation, and it has a unique characteristics. It can help immediately. Next. We at Robotic Cats, we develop AI wildfire detection solutions for governments. We use hundreds of thousands of early stage wildfire photos to train our machine learning object detection. It is our honor that we are now helping 9 countries to protect their national parks, forests, and communities. We see increase in adoptions. The catch is climate changes faster. Next. Let's sidetrack a little bit to talk about pandemic. One thing we all learned in year 2020 is global crises require governments, business, and people to work together to solve it. We need different tools for different stakeholders to stop the threat from spreading. Masks for COVID-19, early detection for wildfires. Next. Next. Therefore, we wanted to do something different. We developed a new product category, wildfire detection software as a service, to address the needs of business and consumers. We named this product Lookout. Lookout works with existing surveillance cameras. No new hardware is required, and deployment is much faster. You can turn on Lookout on your video cameras in 5 minutes. Lookout uses machine learning object detections to detect wildfires from the images captured by your device. If Lookout finds anything suspicious, it will send you alerts with photos to help you to take timely actions. It is easy to use. We plan to launch Lookout this year, and our first customer stories came much sooner and closer than we could imagine. It is Big Tree Animal Center. Next. They are a nonprofit which provides shelter and caretaking services to 150 abandoned cats and dogs. The center was almost burned down by a wildfire in a Sunday evening last October. The 4 volunteering staff could not evacuate all the animals timely by themselves, so they asked for urgent help via social media. And within 2 hours, 200 Hong Kong citizens went to Big Tree at midnight to help, with their own animal cages in their bare hands. It is amazing. It was inspiring. Luckily, they evacuated all the cats and dogs timely and safely, and the wind direction changed. The firefighter extinguished the fire, and the animal center was not damaged. Big Tree need more than knocks. With the support and help from our partners, Access, Netgear, Amada, Wrestle, and the Hong Kong government, we deployed our first Lookout pilot at Big Tree Animal Center early this year. This pilot project protects big trees from wildfires. It lays the foundations to protect millions and billions of trees around the world. Next. Our next story is about Uruguay. Piriápolis is a tourist center in southern Uruguay. There are beautiful beaches, forests, historic landmarks. During the summertime between January and March, many people visit Piriapolis for vacations, hiking, camping, barbecue. All these human activities increase the wildfire risk of the city. Our partner, CIEMSA, deployed Lookout in Piriapolis last June. Since then, the software as a service has been detecting wildfires almost every day. It is a local practice to do prescribed fires, to clean the land and reduce fuel. Lookout detected all these prescribed fires at their early stages. The detection performance impressed the local fire department. We are going to deploy Lookout in more cities in the country. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our partner CIEMSA. This is Uruguay. This is Hong Kong. We are on the opposite ends of the planet. We are 12 hours away from each other. They speak Spanish and we don't. It takes them additional effort to work with us, a young startup in Asia. It is their will, trust, inclusiveness that transcend all the distance and difference between us. Gracias. Our first story is about Brazil. Next. To combat climate change, we have to protect the Amazon forest from wildfires and deforestation. Our partner AgroRobotics deployed the first Lookout pilot in Barra do Garças early this month. It is a major tourist and agricultural city in central Brazil. We decided in last March to bring Lookout to Barra do Garças. We made it finally after 6 months. It was very challenging to procure equipment, to move things around the country, to arrange on-site work. It takes determination and patience to make this pilot happen. So kudos to our partner, AgroRobotics. Next. To see is to believe. This pilot system shows stakeholders how the technology works. We are now working with more than 10 potential customers in the country. We are trying our best to protect the Amazon forest from wildfires. Next. I hope you like these 3 stories. They are the cornerstones that help more people to step up, to move forward, to go the extra mile. We have Lookout now in 7 markets. Lookout will be deployed in 12 countries by the end of the year. It shows that by working together with the right tools, we can bring positive impacts on a global scale today. Next. It is my pleasure to announce that Lookout is now available to the public. Please feel free to register your free trial account at lookout.roboticscast.com. Next. I end my presentation with this photo. It looks like a standard postcard picture. And when I spend time with it, I see different things. It teaches me important lessons that I want to share with you. It is about perspective. For some, they see in the photo the fragility of the pilot system. They see the lack of resources. They see weaknesses. To us, we see connectedness. We see everything aligns perfectly, and we see love. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the interesting presentation. I know time is very limited, but luckily we will have time for discussion in the Q&A session. Our third speaker is Dr. William Castan. William received his PhD in applied mathematics from Grenoble Alpes University. He carried out academic research activities in various places, among which the French Research Institute for Digital Sciences and the European Commission Joint Research Center. Since 2012, William is managing research and development at the NEVIA, an SME working on measuring, monitoring, and forecasting in the water, energy, and environment sector. His main research interests are river monitoring and hydrological forecasting, computer vision and image processing, sensitivity and uncertainty analysis, and data assimilation. Once again, welcome and thank you for joining us. Over to you.
Thank you very much. So today I will be talking about the applications of artificial intelligence for the monitoring and forecasting of flood events. Next, please. So the first quantity of interest for the management of flood hazards is the water level. And several flood crises, just such as the one in Paris in 2016, have shown that there is a real need for non-contact sensors, enabling remote visualization and verification. Next, please. By leveraging the advances from the video surveillance industry, we have developed artificial intelligence-based video analytics, transforming CCTV cameras into smart sensors. Hazard monitoring applications can be installed just like an app on a smartphone and provide very useful information for disaster management. Next. The cam level sensor we have developed, which is shown here, produces both water level time series, just like any sensor. You can see those time series on the right, but also, sorry? But also, this sensor also produces augmented images with overlays, greatly facilitating operations and decision making. Next, please. This can be installed, so the video should start and run. Maybe click on it. Thank you. So you have an example here on the operation of this sensor for which can be applied to rivers and canals, such as here on the French Riviera. If you move to the next slide, you can also see an application. Next, please. You can also see an application in a harbor in Taiwan. So the same operating principle can be used to monitor water levels in dam or also in lakes. Next, please. And then what is important is that the overlays which are automatically produced provide essential information such as flood thresholds, historical flood marks, but also virtual staff gauges, and also lastly, the detected water level and its corresponding value in meters or in feet. And this whole range of information really enable very quick and efficient decision making during crisis management. Next slide, please. There is also a video on the right, thank you. However, knowledge on the water level is not sufficient in order to design flood control structures or calibrate models which are used for analysis or anticipation. This is why significant efforts are dedicated to the measurement of river flows by national or local hydrometeorological services. You can see examples of dangerous operations on the field in Corsica or in Vaucluse. However, velocity and discharge remain quantities of interest which are very often challenging or impossible to measure during extreme events. Next, please. Our CamFlow solution operating on fixed cameras, in addition to the water level, also measures the surface velocities from the river flows and compute discharge using knowledge on the geometry of the riverbed, but also hydraulic principles. Next. On the next slide here, you have an illustration there is a video on the right, an illustration of the visualization of the element at risk, but also at the same time, the camera also produces very rich observation data, which will lead to very significant improvements for both design and structures and calibration of prediction models in the future. Next. Similar information can be provided also by smartphones or drones, mostly offline. Next, when you combine these hardware devices, which are really cost-effective, with dedicated workflows and software, they really become new tools for measuring river flows. Screenshots from a software enabling the processing of those videos are presented here, and they really become a new tool now for hydrometric practitioners. Next slide. Since many city infrastructures can be flooded during extreme events, these tools can also be used in order to assess the stability of pedestrians or cars in cities, which actually depends on both water level and surface velocity. So you have an example here of surface velocity measurements during a flood which occurred in Cannes 6 years ago. Next slide, please. Beyond monitoring and measuring, the management of flood hazards also requires anticipation and early warning. So having reliable measurements, especially on discharge, opens the way to the setup of forecasting model that will anticipate flooding using information on rainfall. But the fact that there is no consensus in the scientific community on the appropriate model structure or governing equations really testifies to the difficulty of this problem. Artificial intelligence, as emphasized here, really can be used to complement process-based modeling, combine models and data in real time, but also quantify uncertainties. Next slide, please. We developed at Tenevia operational tools implementing some of those principles in order to provide real-time flood forecasting using rainfall observed by meteorological monitoring networks or predicted by weather models. And lastly, in order to provide a feedback loop, I'm still on the same slide. Sorry. In order to provide a feedback loop, also the measurements provided by cameras or other sensors are simulated in real time in order to operate optimal adjustment and reduce uncertainties. On the next slide, you can see here a video with rainfall observations and nowcasting, but also the resulting hydrological forecasts, which are updated every 5 minutes and really provide this interesting information for crisis management. And the next slide. Thank you. On the next slide, you can see how easily a decision maker can access to this type of information, because many stakeholders need anticipation for crisis management, but few have really the human and technical resources in order to maintain and develop hydrometeorological forecasting chains, so that using this solution, it can be provided as a service with access to web mapping and interactive plots in order to assess the current situation. I will present very quickly a use case on the next slide. It is the city of Toulon metropolitan area in southern France. This is a city which is really prone to flash floods. On the next slide on this map, you can see the list of municipalities involved. And if you move to the next, sorry, you can see also that those municipalities are crossed by rivers, coastal rivers, which are completely dry most of the year, but characterized by very rapid reactions after precipitation events. So the objective of those stakeholders was to develop a monitoring network which can be used for crisis management, but also that will provide valuable information to set up early warning using forecasting models. On the next slide, you can see the network of cameras which was installed and that will be further extended in the coming years. So this information is on the actual state of the river is really used together with alerts by SMS or by email to inform the different municipalities on the element at risk. the next slide. On the next slide, you can see also the forecasts which are provided at the numerous locations of the basin, because this is a spatially distributed model. And those, for each point, you have access to the current state of the river, but also the arrow shows the threshold that will be reached for the coming hours or for the coming days. Next, please. So, in summary, there is still a lot to be done for the applications of artificial intelligence for flood management. But AI already provides very useful information before, during, and after flood events. I thank you for your attention, and we'll be happy to reply some questions in the late session.
Thank you, William, for your very informative presentation. For all attendees, please keep on adding your questions for the Q&A to the chat box. Last but not least, we have Mr. Craig Fugate. Craig served as President Barack Obama's FEMA administrator from 2009 to 2017. He led FEMA through multiple record-breaking disaster years, dealt with more than 500 disasters and emergencies, and oversaw the federal government's response to major events such as the Joplin and Moore tornadoes, Hurricane Sandy, Hurricane Matthew, and the 2016 Louisiana flooding. Craig currently provides senior-level advice and consultation in the area of disaster management and resiliency policy through Craig Fugate Consulting LLC. He also serves as the Chief Resilience Officer at One Concern. Craig, over to you.
Well, thank you for having me, and good day. I'm going to take a little bit of a different approach. Most of what we've been talking about is dealing with improving the outcomes of the event during a response or immediately before that. But my observations and looking at a long history of disasters, even with better information, we are not going to change the outcome, particularly the damages from most of these events. And as we're seeing climate-driven weather hazards increasing in severity, we're seeing a disaster impact that our past history hasn't prepared us for, our infrastructure wasn't built for, and in many cases, we lack the information and data of how severe it could be. So let's go to the next slide. At One Concern, we've been looking at how to use machine learning and had started out with earthquakes and then flooding. But we have moved beyond just looking at the immediate impacts. Again, we're not trying to forecast that an event is about to occur. What we're really focused on is forecasting the impacts of that event, and also looking not just as a single point on the map or a building and how that performs, but really looking at communities and the systems of networks, from infrastructure to the vulnerabilities of populations to these hazards. And there's a word in here that I think, coming from government, we'd almost, ask the question, why are we talking about monetizing risk? It should be about saving lives, reducing property. Who would want to make money off of this? It's not really about making money as much as until you price risk in a way that industries understand that if they don't change what they're doing or how they're doing it, the cost will exceed their ability to manage that risk, either through insurance or other activities. And so this is really about how do you price risk in a way that induces both governments, but more importantly, private sector to change behaviors, both in reducing carbon emissions and other greenhouse gases, but also actions they need to take now to mitigate against the impacts. And this is, for a lot of people in industry, something they're still coming to terms with, is that the climate has already changed. We're not going back. Our goals on controlling carbon emissions is about keeping it from getting much worse than it already is. But if you look at the extreme rainfall events that are occurring globally, you're looking at the drought and the wildfires that are occurring globally, they are record-setting. Our past isn't preparing for us, and our infrastructure, again, wasn't built for us. So let's go to the next slide. So this is, again, how we're looking at the impacts of climate. And what we're trying to do is where we have done a lot of work and have projects undergoing in Japan where we're forecasting specific river and other flood events. The other question we're trying to ask is, can we model a community and look at an extreme rainfall event? Not what historically has happened, but literally almost like filling the bathtub, and start looking for sensitivity and signals of what is most vulnerable, what areas would fail first, how much rain would it take before certain infrastructures could fail, and how does that affect the community and the supporting networks? Next slide. So this is starting with this idea of, one is already been presented, is the quality of the data. And again, the base data that helps drive the models to forecast the impacts of an event. But also building into that the infrastructure, the transportation nodes, the power grid nodes, and adding to that population vulnerabilities and focusing on the community, not just a specific point or a specific infrastructure. The more extreme the weather events have become, the more we see the interconnectedness and how points of failure that seem unrelated can cause even new problems that weren't anticipated. And as I've learned a long time ago, the most expensive way to find out how bad a disaster can be is when it's occurring. It's better to know it in advance and gives us a chance to look at techniques or practices that could buy down that risk. Again, if we're waiting to the point of the event, we get incremental improvements by better forecast, better information. But the big savings and the big changes come, the changes we can make before disasters occur to reduce those impacts. Next slide. And this is very simplistic, but this is the idea. Let's just take, in this case, we're just taking a single company and a supply chain issue and looking at how flooding that may not be impacting the facility itself, but affects its supply chain could suddenly cause shortfalls in its production line. And these are things that we've seen in the United States, but we've also seen globally. And COVID really, I think, finally got people to recognize how many single points of failure we have in a global supply chain. The way I like to explain that is the more efficient we have built systems to maximize profit, reduce cost, has actually built very fragile system. By its very definition, they're not very resilient. But getting companies to make investments or at least understand those vulnerabilities has been a challenge because there's not really been good tools out there to look at a variety of climate-driven scenarios and go, where are your vulnerabilities? And again, this is very simplistic, but it is this idea that you're not just a point on the map. You have a service area, you have a supply chain, you have workforce. We have found some companies were blind to the fact that they had spent a lot of time looking at their facilities, but they hadn't looked at where their people lived. And in some cases, the workforce wouldn't be able to get to work because of disruptions in the infrastructure. In other cases, their housing would be severely impacted. We saw this in Hurricane Michael down on the Florida coast when a Category 5 made landfall. It has significantly impacted businesses' ability to recover because there was no affordable housing left in the region after the storm went through. Next slide. So as we look at all this data, this is what we're calling fragility, is what's the sensitivity and what's the disruption? As we saw with Hurricane Ida, we had long-term power disruptions in New Orleans. New Orleans, the city, had relatively limited wind damages. The majority of the impacts there were the power outages. And so one of the questions that we get asked a lot from industry is, well, how long would power be down? And what can we do about that? And this is what we're finding extremely interesting. In the US, common practice is if you identify the need for emergency power, you install a fossil fuel generator, natural gas or diesel. That works well in limited events, but as we saw in Hurricane Ida, both the natural gas systems can be impacted. We've seen this with a big concern this coming winter in many parts of the world is going to be escalating prices and shortages in natural gas. But then diesel systems require transportation, ports, availability of fuel, all of which was disrupted during Ida. But what was interesting was a condominium complex had gone with solar, both as a backup system, but also to reduce their carbon footprint. And during Ida, they had power. And so if you understand how long power may be out, can we help companies make better decisions about if they determine they need emergency power, of looking at going to renewables instead of just going with the usual method of putting in a fossil fuel generator, which doesn't generate revenue, is a capital expenditure and requires maintenance and long-term, still has fuel availability as one of its major shortfalls. But renewables, a lot of people say, well, it doesn't make sense to do that in most cases. Well, if you need emergency power and you look at the fact that renewables actually generate power year round and you're getting return on that, it starts to change that discussion. But this is this idea of being able to show industries, well, in these scenarios, power outages could be measured in this time frame. Now, given your downtime, does it make sense to make those investments? Next slide. So as we look at this and we look at how the system works, again, my focus has really been taking a step back from the response and going, if we simulate these events and we give decision makers tools, both in government and the private sector, to ask this question, what can you do differently before the event occurs to reduce impact and grow and build resiliency, with an emphasis on vulnerable populations, which historically most models and most tools such as mitigation are often based upon cost savings. In the US, it's common to say that for every dollar we invest in reducing impacts of disasters or mitigation could give us a $4 to $9 return on that investment. That tends to bias towards more affluent communities, more valuable properties, leaving the most vulnerable behind. And so we're trying to make sure that as we do these models, we include community vulnerability so we don't have that blind spot. Next slide. And so again, we think you can do more before disaster to build resiliency if you have better information and data, and using tools like machine learning to look at a variety of scenarios and a lot of data to look at interconnectedness. Hopefully we'll start identifying these blind spots that we can address, that we don't wait to the disaster to find out how bad something can be. Thank you.
Thank you. This was a great presentation, and I already see some questions coming from the audience. Thank you again to all the speakers for these high quality presentations. It's now time to move on to the Q&A segment. For this, I would like to pass the floor to Thomas Mettical, who is also an intern at the Resilience to Disasters and Conflicts Global Support Branch of UNEP.
Many thanks, Maxime, and thank you again to all the speakers for their insightful presentations. In this Q&A session, we will try and answer as many questions as possible in the next 30 minutes. As a quick point, I would like to remind speakers to turn on their cameras when responding. I'm checking all the questions that we have, and I've seen some questions already. However, I encourage the audience to address any doubts and inquiries in the chat box. So starting off the Q&A, we have a question from Sarath Joy to William. Do you think flood monitoring systems can be adapted to storm surge detection in seashores?
Hello. Yes, thanks for this question. Yes, depending on the site configuration, the current operational solution can be used for such problem. In some context, depending on the areas, some adaptations might be made. But this is an interesting application case.
Thank you. We have another question from Abhijit Ajikumar for Craig. In remote areas which you do not have development according to the reports of disaster management mechanisms, how can we implement AI in that area?
Well, again, it depends upon how granular you want to be and the diminishing returns on the need for data and that cost versus what you're trying to achieve. But if you look at some of the global data sets and using machine learning, we can start giving tools to local decision makers. And again, we may not be able to give you down to a block level of what could be impacted in a flood, but we can at least begin looking at how sensitive the areas are. And the more remote you are, the more vulnerabilities we see with disruptions to supply chain, single points of failure, just being able to identify where people are at now starts giving the rescuers a better idea if a flood occurs. These are the areas that will most likely flood. So, you can, with the granular data, you can get down to street level information. But in more remote areas, less infrastructure, that resolution may not be needed. And quite honestly, it may become an impediment trying to get that data if you can achieve an outcome that's more based upon less granular information, but more actionable types of things you could do.
Thank you. And we have a question for Andre. What kind of training data do you use and how do you get this data?
Good questions. We need to use early stage wildfire photos. You don't see them on TV or newspaper or magazines. In fact, we work very closely with some of our customers, those national parks or forestry. They may have some early stage wildfire photos, and then we work close with them to work together to build a AI model that can work for them. Yeah.
Thank you. And a question for Mohammed. With the evolution of social media over the years, how has your machine learning analysis changed since you began your work?
Well, I think this question has two parts, like the evolution of social media. And we know that over the years, many new social media platforms have emerged, and more people are using social media nowadays because of easy, cheap access to mobile technologies, etc. So we have seen over the years more data, especially during the disaster events that we need to deal with. But on the other side, the second part of your question about the evolution of AI and machine learning techniques, I would say they have also covered a long way since we started in 2012. They are becoming more robust, especially with advancements in deep neural networks. Many crisis informatics stocks have started to show very good results. So yeah, I have seen good evolution on both sides.
Thank you. We have a question from Kwan Chun for Craig. How can AI algorithms like deep learning help with finding vulnerabilities in existing production chains?
Well, a lot of people are going to, mapping out these lines and looking at the supply chain, stuff like that. But what's harder to do is apply different scenarios, such as the one that's most common that we're seeing that's really causing a lot of problems across the globe is just the extreme rainfall events we're seeing. And it was interesting, we've done this in Seattle and some other places for companies where we looked at the extreme events. And it turned out that there in many cases, it wasn't their buildings that was the problem. It was the transportation system and how vulnerable it was. And being able to have good transportation data sets, but then applying extreme rainfall events to see where those failures could occur. It's not uncommon, you'll see in the US during some extreme rainfall, interstate systems are shut down not just for hours, sometimes for days or weeks. And you wouldn't really think about that being an impact if you're multiple states away. But if that's how your suppliers get goods to you, they're going to have to find another route. And it may take either delays or in some cases, there's no good workarounds until the waters recede. So that's what we're trying to do is look at, map out your supply chain, map out all of the things that are required to produce what you do, and then start applying the vulnerabilities and really focusing right now on the flood events across that entire chain and go, where are you most vulnerable or most sensitive to these impacts? and what are the time frames of those disruptions to start making decisions about what you could do differently.
Thanks, that was very informative. We have a question from Abhijit to William. Can we introduce computer automated systems if a flood occurs where the water has the highest chance to flow and give immediate response to the people residing over there?
Yep, thank you for this question. The problem is that depending on the place, the flooded areas are not the same for each event or for each range of event. But of course, this is a critical issue. It's good to have monitoring and forecasting, but it's really critical for those systems to be connected to alert systems and sending in massive information to people, either with predefined list of areas, but you have also tools now, and we have been connected our solutions with those tools, which enable, for example, to draw a map, on a map a polygon, and with SMS that can be sent to all mobile phones actually in this area at the moment during the flood. So of course, having static settings like this can be very interesting, but many complex crises really require dynamic systems.
Thank you. We have a question from Nazarjeen Jalin, and it's more of an open question to the people who have used simulations in their solutions. So a natural disaster like earthquake or floods change the landscape of the place dramatically. How do the simulation tools account for that for relief management? Don't know if anyone wants to step forward for that.
Well, that's correct. What we do is, you're modeling what you have, and we know that earthquakes can change topography. It can cause landslides, a lot of things that can change. And so we also look at how do you ingest data sets, particularly high resolution LiDAR, to go back into the models to say, this is where the topography has changed, because now it starts affecting other hazards like floods. We see the same thing with wildfires, with burn scar, that now increases flood risk because we lose the ability to mitigate some of the rainfall events. So some of the hurricanes we've seen, we actually see the bathymetry change because of storm surge. So all of these things mean that your data collection has to be ongoing. And that's one of the challenges. And it's also a huge cost. The better the quality of the data, the more you're paying. But it means that when you've had significant changes because of the event, you got to update your data sets or your models are going to be off.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thanks. We actually have one more question for you, Craig. So how can private businesses be encouraged to share the data they collect on the vulnerability of their own supply chains to open data sources? Is this type of data currently aggregated for public monitoring purposes? There's a question from Angus Hamilton.
I don't think we're going to get the private sector to do this voluntarily. In many cases, they treat a lot of this vulnerability as proprietary information that competitors could use against them. However, through regulations, we can. And most recently, the Security and Exchange Commission in the United States has developed a sample letter to go out to regulated industries, those that are publicly traded, that they need to disclose what is their climate risk, their data sets, and other information so that investors can make good decisions based upon their vulnerabilities. So I think in the United States, we are seeing that regulatory requirements for disclosure is going to start this process of opening up data, getting it more publicly available. It may still require, I doubt we're going to get to the point where we have a standardized, easy to ingest data format. We may be crawling through the SEC disclosure reports, but it's a start. But because most companies look at this as proprietary, risk averse, and not wanting to disclose risk that competitors may have, I think it's going to require regulatory efforts. And then hopefully in those regulatory efforts, maybe some standardization of those data sets so they're easier to ingest in the models.
Thank you. A question from Nazrajan Jalin for Andre. What metrics are used for the AI wildfire detection, and what are the numbers at the moment?
Oh, good questions. There are several metrics, and the most common one we talk about is true positive and false positive. True positive means, okay, how many wildfire you detected, and false positive means, okay, you detect something which is not a real wildfire. That's the two most common parameters we are now working on. And then there's another attendee asked a very good question. We also working on some what we call it false negative, which means that there's a wildfire, we didn't detect it. And for those data, we need to work close with our customer, because we don't know what we don't know. We don't have that data. We need some input from customer, like national parks, to provide those data to us, and then we can work on it to enhance the system. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A question for Craig again, from Akil. What are the typical data sets we use for building supply chain resilience systems?
Well, the two that are most significantly impacted during a lot of these events, whether it's tropical cyclones or rain events or even earthquakes, is power grids and road transportation, rail transportation, and ports. And so those are data sets that are, I won't say they're easy, but they're relatively known to get to do the models. So we tend to look at that. Water systems, interestingly, it's harder to get because it's usually government-based, municipal, a lot of different systems out there. Some companies are very sensitive to their water supply as far as the manufacturing process. And then the other thing is where the raw materials come from. And that's usually a transportation-related model, but also looking at the origins, vulnerabilities to other hazards, and how those could disrupt the materials. Kind of a very high level is just the current chip shortage that we're seeing across a lot of manufacturing cycles with COVID. It's the COVID impact on the workforce and things that are causing slowdown in production, not necessarily a supply chain not being able to get it here, although we are seeing in the ports of the US, because of workforce reductions, significant delays in unloading ships, which is also causing a backup. So that's a cause and effect of being able to look at not only your manufacturing and the transportation system, but then where the origin of your raw materials come from, or your key suppliers, and looking at their vulnerabilities.
Thank you. One more question from Yola Al-Azmar for Mohammed. How do you make sure that the published information, especially related to crisis/disaster response, is not misused or used to harm people?
Well, that's a very good question. Now, definitely the information that we process is very sensitive information, and it can have, personal identifier information which can be misused. Now, the processes that have been adopted by many response organizations make sure that the information that they receive through traditional means as well as through non-traditional means, for example, one of them is using social media, through AI, through remote sensing, etc., is in line with their frameworks. So that's the key. So the protocol that we adopt is given by the humanitarian organizations, and we have to provide and fulfill all the parameters before we hand over that information to them. So I think, yeah, that's the key.
Thanks. That was a good answer. We have a question from Mohammed Sabir. This can be for Andre or William. Is there any software integrated camera sensing system that can be used for dam river management? I think that's probably more to William.
Yes, of course. As presented Yeah, sorry, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, typically the camera resolution can be used to monitor the water level in a dam, and then it's completely available as an edge solution running directly in the camera using the computational resources from the camera. It means that when the camera is connected to an IT system or a data logger, it can provide measurements just like any other sensor, and those measurements can be integrated to assess the current situation and anticipate on the coming hours. Is that okay?
Yes, sorry, I'm not sure if that was my internet or yours, but I think I'm back now. I have a question from Cijo Jacob. I think this is an open question to anyone here. What are the challenges that underdeveloped countries may face in implementing technology-based disaster management? I don't know if anyone wants to step forward for that.
Well, I'll throw in here. I think this is where the developing world has some responsibilities. And there's a debate going on in the US right now with military satellites and their ability to detect wildfires and other things at very high resolution. This is something when Vice President Al Gore actually started the Global Disaster Information Network. Can we take our global sensors and the developed for satellite capabilities and develop tools to push this information out to developing countries so they have better data sets to look at their hazards, both in real time as events are about to occur, but also in planning for what could happen. So again, all this really comes back to is lack of data, lack of resources. But as you've heard in many of the presentations, if we're using more of the global monitoring systems and apply this technology, it may not have the resolution that we could get in more developed areas where we have better on the ground data, but it's useful and gets to that point where can I do something different to change the outcome? And I think that's the question. I think some people are looking for perfection. I'm like, I just want to reduce the impacts. So how do we take our global satellite system, both the commercial and the militarized classified systems, and derive information and data that's useful to all of the country, including the sparsely populated areas and countries that don't have the developmental resources, and then build tools that can be used by local decision makers and emergency responders.
Thanks. I don't know if any of my other speakers want to add on to that, or is it going to move on?
Just a latest detail. I think also the ability of having for monitoring networks autonomous systems, which are powered by solar panels and appropriate communication networks can be critical in some developing countries. But the good thing is that since cable for what triggers networks, since less development was made on cable connections, in developing countries very often GSM telecommunications are more developed than in some other countries. But still, this powering the sensors and then transmitting the information is really an important issue.
Thank you. We have a question for Mohammed. What key features of a tweet do you usually look for when training a model?
Well, it depends. It depends on the task at hand, right? So, for example, if the task is to do the classification of traits into some predefined information categories, then usually linguistic features like importance of words, their context, their dependencies on each other are the more like the most used types of features for training models, right? And if you take a different task, let's suppose a sentiment analysis from tweets or opinion mining, then you might look at words polarities, right? The direction, again, the context of those polarities and the words would be the important features. So it really varies based on the task.
Thank you for that. We've got a question from Akana Raghavan for Craig. So her research institute is on climate vulnerability assessment for smallholders in India. For this, she collects socioeconomic primary data from farmers. Normally, the sample size is below 500. We would like to apply AI for assessing the climate vulnerability of the farming communities based on agroecological units. So the question is, one, is there any possibility to apply AI in these type of vulnerability assessments? And two, does big data mean around 5,000 households? And three, if there's any is it possible to predict the vulnerability of households for 2030?
The answer is yes, but the caveat is it costs a lot of money. I think this is probably the thing that we're seeing as we continue to advance AI, and we're using cloud computing as we increase the collection of data sets, and the fact that these models require a lot of runs to produce their output, and then they need quality control. This gets expensive, so it gets to diminishing returns. But you can look at, once you get to the data sets you need, again, looking at what resolution do you need to see the impacts. Again, I think one of our blind spots was we were trying to get down to building by building resolution, and that just got enormously expensive. That may change as we get better at data assimilation and look at how much data we really need, but it's doable. It's just right now, is it affordable? And I think this is another barrier to entry into the world of using machine learning. Is it's really easy to do pilots, and it's good to do a geographical area. When you start talking about going global and you start looking at those data sets, then you're looking at new scales and that cost. But it's doable. Again, what we're finding in many cases, we understand a lot of the science and the models behind various types of hazards. So we're not so much creating new science, but we are using that bedrock against data and machine learning to now be predictive of those impacts.
Thank you. A question for Andre. So how does your AI deal with detecting smoke at nighttime compared to daytime?
Oh, okay. Again, a good question. First of all, visual detection using AI can detect smoke at nighttime, and the smoke particle will reflect the light emitted by the fire. Point one. And point two, when compared to daytime, we use this term, we need a bigger target at nighttime, a bigger smoke if we want to detect it, because in daytime the sunlight reflected by the smoke is more visible to the camera. At nighttime, we need a bigger smoke to a bigger target for the AI to detect it. Yeah, good questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, I think we need to wrap up soon, so I think we have time for one more question. This is a question open to everyone here. So it's from Mikhail Kupatil. How much accuracy is there in disaster prediction? Are there any challenges after getting a predicted model using the features after the first time? Everyone wants to step forward for that.
Yeah, I'll take this one. We've done some of this with earthquakes and other things, and we find the models are good, but they're not as precise. And I think this is the thing we got to be very clear on. We're forecasting the probabilistic of impacts. We cannot get to the point of saying this will definitely happen at this point to this measurement. But we can get close enough to show the impacts and likelihood of the impacts and failures that can occur. There's a second part of this, though, is in trust. And we're actually seeing this in a lot of the climate and weather models, where they're getting better and better at extreme events. Yet we're not seeing the public or decision makers act on that. This has been the blame of the climate scientists. Their models have been very good, but there was not belief in them because it hadn't happened yet. And we're seeing this with U.S. forecasts for extreme rainfall events. So the forecast for Ida in New York City was very good. It never happened before, and they didn't react as they would if they knew how bad it could be. So I think part of this will be, one, understanding these are probabilistic forecasts are not going to be as precise as the actual going out there and measuring the event. And two, as we get better, there's still a lot of uncertainty and trust in these models of how good they can be and how well they'll forecast the event. So we're going to be doing a lot of what we call hindcasting, of looking at previous events, apply the models and see did it match up to what happened. But then when real events occur, then that will also be the next measure of how the models are performing.
Thanks for that answer. Do any of the other speakers want to add on to that?
Yeah, I think I can talk about from our field in our area. So like in my experience, it's very rare that the models which are trained for certain data distribution, when they applied in the wild, it's very rare that they work well. And in most of the cases, the academic models, the publications that we take and inspire from, they are trained under controlled settings, and they are trained for certain training data. They are tested on portion of that data, or maybe a held out set. But when you apply that model in the wild, in a real world situation for a real world task, there are so many difficulties. There are so many things to tweak, to tune, and to retrain those models. And this is one of the challenges that we have been facing. And we are, at least within our context, we are trying to have some sort of supervision with the help of active learning approaches to involve humans to retrain those models with event-specific data and the context given to the model closer to the information needs that the stakeholders have.
Thank you. I don't know if any of my remaining speakers want to add on to the question to close off, or we can end it there. Okay, I think we can end it there then. So in the interest of time, it seems I have to put an end to the Q&A session. Thank you very much, everyone, for taking the time to attend this session, both speakers and attendees. It was a very productive discussion, and it was nice to hear of so many examples where artificial intelligence has been used in disaster response and management. Before we close today's session, we would like to remind you all that our next webinar will take place on the 12th of October and will focus on drones in disaster management. The timing is the same as the one we had today, 3 p.m. Central European Summer Time. See you in 2 weeks, and a good day to everyone. Thank you.